What is up, everybody? No intro today because no Howard Bender today. Instead, we bring in the guest, one of my very favorites, Theo Gremminger. He's going to be the yin to my yang today. You know why? Because I've been writing 32 articles in 32 days like an absolute maniac. 80,000 words, the equivalent of, a James Patterson book. I don't know. But it was quite a bit. Theo not only is plugged into free agency, but he's got a leg up on me in the draft and things like that with the prospects. So when we're going through and we're talking about landing spot, we're talking about all the excitement today. Theo can also add a little wrinkle to that. Are you excited for that, Theo? Are you fired up for today, my boy?
I'm fired up to be in the mix with you today because I know, like, even last year, like, this day gets you so fired up.
Okay.
Legal tampering or the negotiating period. This is like right in your wheelhouse. We've been talking about this stuff for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks when it comes to free agency. And last week was sort of like it just got really real. We had so many moves last week. The build up to for like last week leading up to today was crazy. All these big names on the move, a couple of surprising landing spots. I mean, this has been like a really fun offseason so far. Yeah, and like you said, the NFL draft is like 40 something days away. So
It's
it's
right there.
all moving very quickly.
Football never sleeps, bro. The
Uh,
Super Bowl was less than 30 days ago, right? It seems like it was a million years ago, but it was less than 30 days. We're already back into it. We've got news already happening, which we're going to start with at the top of the hour here. We're going to go right into the legal tampering period. Opens at noon, but deals will be announced at 12:01. Like the basically the way it works in the NFL, for those that don't know, is teams like negotiate with these players, and there's like an understanding that if all talks are off and the player is not going to go back, they can kind of reach out, right, Theo? Like
yeah.
even when there's a rule, actually, I was looking it up. If they say that a player is formally going to be released, they formally announce it, but it's not effective to the league year, like Aaron Rodgers, that player can talk to other teams. So there will be news right away. There are players that have actually been released that could announce a new deal right now. If you've been officially released, you can actually announce a new deal even before noon. And Theo, you were just looking at one, my favorite player. Tell everybody where Evan Ingram is right at this moment.
Yeah, so Evan Engram is visiting with the Denver Broncos today. This feels like the Aaron Jones to Minnesota signing where Aaron Jones was cut and then another team identified him as an impactful player, uh, had familiarity with him and got the deal done like really quickly. Evan Ingram, obviously, it's a little bit longer buffer because of the timing of the timing of the move by Jacksonville, but Evan Ingram in Denver, like I said this to you in the pre-show, this for me, this is maybe the best possible landing spot for him. You have a quarterback that we thought played extremely well last year, Bo Nix. You also have uh, Evan Engram would slot in as the number 2 target at worst, and possibly be more targeted than Cortland Sutton. Cortland Sutton's never been like a target magnet throughout his career. Last year, obviously, had his best year as a pro, and we like Sutton. But Evan Engram, we've already seen the guy put up tremendous numbers in Jacksonville. When teams want to utilize him as a target magnet, he can fill that need. So it's like a free square. And you bring up the NFL draft. This would have huge NFL draft
Huge.
ramifications because Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren have been linked as a possible players connected with Denver, whether Denver trades up or one falls down to them in the NFL draft. This would sort of take that off the board. So for NFL draft people, this and dynasty managers potentially with rookie picks, this would be a little bit disappointing. But if you're holding Evan Engram on your best balls or your dynasty rosters, this would be an unbelievable landing spot for him. So I really hope this goes down. It would be sort of a splash signing early on today with Evan Engram. You mentioned you had a
Huge.
spot that you preferred to Denver, but
I mean, it's you're splitting hairs, right? I mean, when we're doing like the tiers of landing spots for tight end, there's a tier at the very top with two teams in it. Okay. And it's these two. It's Denver, right? Sean Payton's Joker role. He has two. People get confused by the word Joker because Sean Payton just calls a Joker anyone that can play out of position. So if you have a tight end that can play wide receiver, like Jimmy Graham, for instance, like he had, which is what Evan Engram would be here. I mean, my goodness, he doesn't get better, right? He also will call like a running back a joker if that running back can play wide receiver or run routes like Alvin Kamara. That's what has confused people because you hear Joker and you think Kamara, but it's actually anybody like that, right? There's another spot that is, in my opinion, just as good, which would be the Chargers. Now they might with a new iteration of this offense, want to use a two-way tight end, but right, historically, Greg Roman has used a big slot tight end. Mark Andrews has a top 5 all-time fantasy football season working with Greg Roman, running 80% of his routes from a wide receiver spot. They have Lad McConkey, and then who? I mean, even Josh Palmer is a free agent, right? Quentin Johnston, whatever, right? The current tight ends, Will Disley, I mean, like he could immediately go there and play the big slot split end role there. So those two spots, in my opinion, are top one spot. The more I think about Denver, the better it gets. While we're on Denver, I want to ask you, because we're talking about the Joker situation, right? Javonte Williams is a free agent. And Joe Lombardi, I tweeted this the other day. Every team he's been on the staff of on the offensive side of the football has been top 5 in passes to the running back. That's going back 18 years, Theo. I double triple checked it to make sure people, because people were like, well, actually in 2009 they were 8th in passes to the running back. No. I double checked it.
We call those guys haters.
The haters, dude. I love them, dude. You got to have them. They're very important to have around. But so I went all the way back and checked every team, the Chargers, the Saints, briefly when he was on the Lions, both years with the Broncos. They've been top 5 in passes to the running back. Aaron Jones is now signed back with the Vikings. He probably would have been one of the best bets. As far as some of these free agent guys go, who could potentially land there and get a ton of passes? Is there a specific running back in the draft that you would be like, wow, if this guy went there, he could get 120 targets, like an Alvin Kamara or an Austin Eckler did with. Oh, I forgot to mention he was with the Chargers too. With Austin.
Yeah, I mean, the NFL draft is where we want, from a fantasy perspective, we want Denver to end up with one of these high-end running backs that are available in the NFL draft. That's sort of the top fantasy outcome. We'll see if they value some of these free agents a little bit more than maybe we do. I know Rico Dowdle was linked to Denver. That doesn't exactly get the juices flowing. He would be more of a guy we'd view as sort of a committee back, but Dowdle's been linked to Denver early on. I want Denver. The free square play in this NFL draft is Travion Henderson goes to Denver, and Henderson's probably going to be selected somewhere in between where Denver picks in the first round and where Denver picks in the second round. I believe they have the 52nd overall pick in the second round, and I think they picked 20th in the first round. I'd have to double check that. So I think Henderson's a guy that we would project to get somewhere in that 28 through 40 range. So it would only take a little bit of a trade up or a potential trade down to get in that range. But when it comes to Henderson, he's super explosive. We saw him have a 75-yard catch and run in the semifinal game for Ohio State against Texas. And then we saw a 61-yard run against Notre Dame in the title game. So Travion Henderson is like, when we use the word high value touches and big playability, Travion Henderson's that. It's sort of NFL teams trying to chase the next Jahmyr Gibbs. Big plays are so in vogue. All of the analytics community talks about how the big play, if you have a big explosive play in an NFL game, it like 4X's your chances of scoring on that particular drive. And Detroit's had so much success with Gibbs, and Miami with Devon Achane, that I think backs like that are going to get chased. The archetype's going to get chased. And Henderson's really he's a complete guy. He's got a big sample size. NFL teams are going to really like him. So that one's right there. Now, if they stand pat on the pick and they want to just select a back, Omarion Hampton's my number 2 back in this draft, probably your number 2 back in this draft, and should be everybody's number 2 back in this draft. He's different because he's 220 plus, but he catches the ball very, very well. Wouldn't be your traditional Alvin Kamara type Joe Lombardi back where maybe the 120 targets would be completely out of the wheelhouse. But I think that Omarion Hampton catching 60 balls in a Denver offense, like through the roof, top 5 potential as a scorer, because he can tote the rock, offers some Nick Chubb like ability as a runner. Like Omarion Hampton's it. He's the guy. That's the one we want to see. He's an unbelievably good player. Right. He could go as high as 12 to Dallas, but I think he does go inside the first round. So Travion Henderson, if they are able to maneuver and if they stand pat on the pick and maybe they sign Evan Ingram, just take Omarion Hampton, wheels up for Bo Nix. And you got to remember, Denver has the offensive line. Offensive line's not something they'll have to address. They're strong there.
And I actually asked, funny, he's hanging out in the chat, our guy John, Dynasty Coach A. I asked him, I was like, who's the best pass catching back when I was doing my Denver preview, and he just said Trey.
Yeah.
So he's right there with you on that.
Yeah.
I know we're talking free agency today, but my one landing spot I don't want Omarion Hampton. I mean, I would be, it's hard to say one landing spot, but I worry that the Bears are going to grab him and try and do a David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs thing with him and Swift. And
Yeah.
I want him to just have a full-time role. I want everybody to be Kyron Williams and play 87% of the snaps. I mean,
I wonder about
it's asking too much, but that's what I want.
Yeah, I mean, it's never clean. Like when we talk about draft capital with running backs, like I think we can pretty accurately predict the draft capital, but the clean landing spot, it's not there. I'll say Omarion Hampton to Cincinnati with Chase Brown would be
Right.
really
Yeah.
kind of, and I don't think Cincinnati's
Don't
going to
like
do it in the
that.
first round,
Don't
but
like
I'll say
that.
that Minnesota, after re-signing Aaron Jones, they still could go running back. Minnesota getting a Henderson or and a Hampton in the first round, I think is still in the wheelhouse. So we want a clean path.
Right.
Let's get Omarion Hampton
Yeah,
to the Chargers, the Cowboys, something like that.
never rule out the Patriots and Mike Vrabel and Josh McDaniels doing something stupid too. And just
I'll
being
take
like, oh, let's do two-back system here with Ramondre Stevenson and just, I don't know if I'd love that either. But anyway, so we're talking I mean, for free agents, again, like you said, we prefer the rookies there because, like, I mean, Najee Harris and Nick Chubb, those are more bruiser type backs, right? That would actually be a good if one of those guys would go to the Bears and solve that problem and prevent a rookie from going there, that would be great. Like if today Nick Chubb would sign with the Bears to be their David Montgomery to the DeAndre Swift, that would be good for his career. It would be good for Ben Johnson. It'd be good for that team. It would prevent a rookie from going there. What do you say? I say we just make that happen.
I think Najee is interesting though, because when people hear us say Najee, I think maybe I'm a little bit higher on Najee in the free agent market than you are. I mean, it's sort of a boring name, but
No,
checks
I
off a
like him.
lot of boxes. A lot of boxes we see though, Coop. Like, I come back to the Mingo trade last year for Dallas, and they said, Dallas, why'd you give all this up for Mingo? And they said, well, we loved him in the evaluative process. He was a guy that we almost drafted. That resonates with teams. And Najee Harris was a first round pick. Every year he's been in the pros, he's rushed for 1,000 yards. And he does another thing that coaches love. He plays injured. He's always banged up, always plays through it. And every year he gets 1,000 rushing yards. So
Right.
plays every game, gets 1,000 rushing yards, has first round draft, NFL draft pedigree. Like Najee Harris is a guy where I think he could end up taking one of these free square landing spots. He's been heavily linked to the LA Chargers. I think that
Yes.
one, like if he lands in the Chargers, you'd get really kind of, I think, Najee back in RB2 land,
Mhm.
instead of the RB3 abyss that he's in right now on like underdog.
And I don't want Najee to go to the Bears because I want more for Najee. I'm like you. I want him to go to a spot where he can be the dog, go to the Cowboys, where he can be the every down back, go to the Chargers. That would be nice, right? So I'm with you on that. Like, I guess the Vikings are off the table now. There's only so many teams where there's like a really clear path. I guess the Broncos would be another one where it's like, you know what, get him in. It's a pretty clear path to work.
The Commanders have been mentioned for Najee. I saw that out there. Obviously, it has sort of a overlapping skill set with Brian Robinson a little bit, but again, they might value Najee ahead of him as a pro and view him as an upgrade. Not sure which way he's going to go, but I think Najee does land well, because if this was last year and Najee was in that running back class, he would be way more limited in the potential landing spots. This year, it's just not a great free agent running back class. A little disappointed Aaron Jones signed with Minnesota, just
Right.
because he would have made this free agent class a little stronger at the top. So Jalen Warren out there, a couple other these guys that are interesting, but not
Yeah.
necessarily like impactful.
So I'm surprised that Jalen Warren, they didn't just tender him, right? Because you just tender him the second round tender. No one will sign him to an offer sheet because they're not going to give you a second round pick just to sign him, right? And then you got him for $5 million, right? So I don't know. It's very strange that that's the case. Slashy saying that Twitter is down. If anyone's watching on Twitter still before it went down, come on over to YouTube. Because if you come over to YouTube like Slashy is, you can chat with us. You can talk up there. I posted us up over on Reddit. So I don't know. We'll see if we can get people trickling in over here. But we're talking free agency. Real quick, let's just get the recent news out of the way, just for anybody that missed it. Just if you're watching for you just haven't been as plugged in. Geno Smith has been traded to the Raiders. That happened, third round pick. DK Metcalf was traded to the Steelers. Devontae Adams signed with the Rams. Christian Kirk was about to be released, and then the Texans traded a 7th-round pick for him. Evan Engram was released, and Aaron Jones is back. Is there any major fantasy relevant news over the last couple of days that I missed there?
No, I think you got the Geno Smith trade, obviously the quarterback spot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you covered the main ones for sure, and they're all really exciting news. Like and kind of out there. Like we weren't necessarily Devontae Adams to the Rams is not necessarily something we were projecting. Christian Kirk, sort of a guy we weren't really thinking about, but I think gets a huge lifeline in this role. So there's really some interesting ones, and Debo is the really really fun one because
Right.
Washington had nothing at the wide receiver 2 spot. Debo was in this sort of like downward spiral with San Francisco. Now he goes to a franchise where he's going to have a prominent role. He's going to have a chance to do something, and a team that had really nothing in terms of yak at any spot. They were just a non-yak team. So they're going to do some things in really fun ways to get Debo the ball. This could be like the wide receiver 1 days for Debo are done, but this could be a kind of a renaissance for Debo compared to sort of the downward spiral we saw in the second half of last year.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it seemed like maybe conditioning was an issue with Debo. I hate to say that he looked bigger
Didn't look
than
great.
usual. He
The
didn't look
one in
great.
the
Yeah, and
Eagles jersey, Coop, the picture in the
yeah.
Eagles jersey, not so great.
No. Looked a little bit chunky there, but maybe there's a little healthier eating over on this coast. And I will say, one very interesting rub here is that the running backs coach for Washington Commanders is Anthony Lynn, right? And for he was with those Joe Lombardi offenses where Austin Eckler and Melvin Gordon caught a gazillion passes. You know what I mean? Like, so what if maybe they say, hey, let's put in some packages for Debo Samuel to get some carries and to mix in out of the backfield here. I wouldn't be surprised. So that's what I'm hoping for him. I guess another piece of news for Washington that we didn't mention: Zach Ertz re-signed with them, so he's back. Ben Sinnott on the back burner once again. What are you gonna do, man? But here's the thing: with people are Ben Sinnott. They're like, oh, he's garbage. He's a fullback. There is one positive little piece from last year was that Zach Ertz was remarkably healthy. The one game that he left with a concussion scare was the Saints game. He only played about 20% of the snaps in that game. So all year long, it was Zach Ertz as the starting pass catching tight end, and then John Bates was the tight end too, mostly blocking in line. When that happened, Benson actually leapfrogged John Bates and played 18 snaps in the slot. Now he only caught 2 passes, but at least we saw that they view him as a pass catching tight end, which is half the battle for these guys. Because there's some guys that are obvious blockers, there's some guys that aren't. But until we see them in the NFL, we don't know if teams are going to view them as a blocker or view them as a pass catcher, right? So you come in and you're like, okay, is this guy going to be Michael Pruitt? Is this guy going to be Drew Sample? Drew Sample was a 2nd-round pick, and people didn't know. And then it turns out he's just Mercedes Lewis. He's just a blocker. So at least we saw that he's on that side of the tree, right? And it can give you a little bit of hope, but this signing is a bit of an indictment because if they believed he was at that level, then they would just go with him, right?
It's kind of Luke Schoonmaker. I mean, I hate to say it because I was high on Sinnott in the process, but you talk about a move tight end, super athlete
Right.
that doesn't necessarily take over a room. And also Ertz was really good for them last year. I mean, the two of us podcasted together every week last year, and Zach Ertz was a guy that we talked about literally every single week as this value, especially in shallow leagues. We kept recommending him as a waiver wire pickup, and Ertz ends up having a really strong NFL playoffs as well. That Philadelphia game where they got beat down, Ertz played fantastic in that. And a lot of it was counting stats, but still, it stinks for Sinnott. It just does.
Right.
Anybody holding Sinnott bags in Dynasty, this is also a tough one. Plus, not to get too off topic, it's a really deep tight end class this year. So the chances for Sinnott to gain Dynasty value this year and with this class coming in went down exponentially. So really tough one for us Ben Sinnott bag holders.
Stuff, yeah. And then, like when I do my film study, I've done a few of the players. Like when I watch, my biggest advice to people when you're watching like college tight ends, because there's so many different levels of competition, right? Like obviously with Harold Fannin, you got to remember he's at Bowling Green, right? But look for guys that are making plays in man to man doing difference-making things, right? Making contested catches. The thing with a guy like Luke Schoonmaker is he never even had an opportunity because of the way that Michigan offense was. It was all play action. Every pass he caught, he was wide open. And it's like you don't even know. Like it looks great because he's open, but it's like they were just so deceptive. And they had no reason to say, "Hey, Luke, go out there and beat somebody one-on-one." Whereas you watch Tyler Warren, and it's just all brute force, just absolutely insane. So it's like
Yeah.
certain guys we know for sure. Everybody else, there's a lot of guys you just don't know because they just the scheme's not good or they don't even get the opportunity, and you just gotta trust the NFL evaluation. But hey, this isn't a rookie show, Theo. All right. So
No, we're not talking. Yeah.
stop trying to drag me back into
Sorry.
your
Sorry.
draft and your prospecting and your Matthew Goldens. We're talking here and now. We're talking free agency. So let's get in and we'll start looking at some players and looking at some positions. It looks like uh, ask and you will receive. I just said they should tender Jalen Warren. Looks like the Steelers have tendered Jalen Warren. Looks like Twitter is down, which this is the worst day and the worst possible time for that to happen. So we'll have to pop over to the old Reddit machine and see what the details are. But I'm guessing it would be
It was the
uh,
second round. The
the
second
second
round
round
one.
then.
Yeah, it's a second round one. So I believe this is going to be. They'd have to. A team would have to pay a second rounder for Warren for them to lose Warren, which makes me think that this could be a backdoor way for Warren to be the starting running back
Right.
in Pittsburgh next year. So Warren's been an interesting one where we know Warren can play. He's a different back than Najee, but he's already got 1 year where he had RB2 production, ended the year last year well, had back-to-back strong performances like 15 points in back-to-back games. And then if Najee moves on, you would have to think that Pittsburgh drafts a back to like combine with Warren, but Warren could end up having a career year. So I kind of like this as a value for Warren because it most likely says to me that Pittsburgh just holds on to him. Your thoughts on Warren, Coop?
I mean, I think the thing with Warren, the rub is always that people say that he's not big enough to be an every down back. But I mean, you watch this guy, he is literally murdering people to the
Yeah.
point where the league is like, we're gonna have to keep finding you if you don't cut this out. Like he's just a physical, aggressive player. And now we're seeing more and more kind of smaller backs take on a bigger workload. I mean, like we're never gonna get back to the days of just one guy playing 98% of the snaps, and then if he gets hurt, the backup plays 98. Like we're never going to get another Priest Holmes where he gets 420 touches and then he goes down, and then Larry Johnson gets 370. Like that, those days are over. The closest we have is Kyron Williams, who played 87%, but the next highest, like in terms of average percent of snaps, was Bijan at 75. So the reality is, as long as you're getting the high leverage touches, right? As long as you're getting the goal line, if you get first down, goal line, and 2-minute drill, what more do you need, man?
Yeah.
So I don't know. They could mix it. So what you're hoping for in free agency if you're rooting for Jalen Warren is you're rooting for them to sign someone that is inconsequential. And it basically does what Tyler Algier does, right? Because then in Arthur Smith's offense, he can be Bijan Robinson. So you look at it and say, okay, who is the perfect guy to come in and do just little enough that Jalen Warren can get the bulk of the important touches? How about somebody like Donta Foreman, right? Who has never caught 10 passes in a season? Or how about somebody like AJ Dillon or like just a pure bruiser? And that way, maybe you lose a couple goal line touches, but Jalen Warren is clearly the best back in the backfield. And they view him as the most valued player and they're just trying to supplement him. That's kind of the best case in the modern era is like fill the backfield with losers so that so when the RB coach is saying, hey, who are we going to send out? It's 3rd and 1 with the game on the line. Who are we going to send out there? It's your guy every time. That's
You-
where it's at in the modern NFL.
And I'll throw out one that kind of varying on your opinion of the player and is he cooked or not. I'll throw out Nick Chubb
Dude,
as a potential cheap one.
that Browns fans, man. I mean, they've been through enough, Theo. How dare you?
Well,
That,
I'll
that
throw that out there.
just
I'll also throw
send one of their all-time favorite guys. A guy where when on game day, half the people in the stadium are wearing a Nick Chubb jersey, and you're gonna put him on the Steelers, dude.
yeah, listen.
Evil.
It's not
That's nasty work, bro.
listen, it's not show friends, it's show business.
It's show
And
business.
I
That's
and
right, dude.
I'll say another player who was just cut. I think that this is sort of an ideal outcome for a Jalen Warren would be Pittsburgh goes full on quote unquote committee, but Warren gets the valuable touches. They sign Gus Edwards. It was just cut. They
Yes.
get Gus, and then they draft somebody on day 3 who has more juice than Gus, but would not necessarily be a takeover guy compared to a Jalen Warren. I mean, there's this not to get too prospecty, but this is such a deep running back group that they could easily do that. They could also do a go with Warren and then draft 2 guys on day 2. So that's sort of, we saw this years ago where Green Bay selected in the same draft class Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams. That was a really strong year in 2017. I think a lot of teams might just do that. Draft 2 guys in like rounds 4 and 5 or 4 and 6 and combine them with Jalen Warren. Then that would be something you could potentially get behind, and a cheap way of doing business. So all sorts of scenarios with Pittsburgh. But if they move on from Najee, definitely a boon to Jalen Warren with this sort of the tender they put out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, Nick Chubb would be a little painful, for Jalen Warren. Because I think Chubb, still has enough in the tank that hurts.
Does he? I don't know. Does he? He's kind of old and beat up.
True. But yeah. I mean, but he would. The thing is, like, you got to think of it in terms of who does what, right? Like, let's say Nick Chubb is at least healthy and ready to play. There's a passing, like, they chuck the ball up to DK Metcalf in the end zone, their new acquisition, and the cornerback just grabs him and tackles him. And they go, pass interference in the end zone, place the ball at the 1. If you're the running back coach, who do you send down there to punch that in?
That's the pathway for Chubb, is the fall in the end zone guy, wherever he sort of lands. Does Chubb chase a ring, Coop, at 29 years old? Do you see Chubb sign with somebody as a backup and chase a ring, or does he try to sign with somebody where he has potential viability? I'm not sure which way this thing goes, but I think Chubb will be an interesting one to see how the market treats him.
He's played his whole career with the Cleveland Browns. Like, it's literally, the building's on fire. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's where, okay, the building's on fire. Might as well just jump out the window and hopefully I'll land anywhere else. Like, so I of course he wants to chase a ring, but I think that he's just sitting here and he's like, get me out of here to anywhere. And just, it'd be nice to see what it's like to play for a team like that, like a winning franchise, right? And I think there's a lot of these. Let me pivot real quick to some of these, because talking quarterbacks isn't always like the sexiest thing. But here's what I want for some of these young quarterbacks that aren't going to get a shot to start. This is what they should do. Sam Darnold played for the Jets and then he played for the Panthers, right? And it was a nightmare. And he said, I'm going to go to the 49ers for nothing and see what it looks like with a winning franchise. See what a winning organization does from the inside, and then I'll know. And then next time when I pick a team, I'll know what that looks like. And then he went to the Vikings, and then he won 14 games, right? Some of these guys like Mac Jones, Daniel Jones, I mean, they could potentially start or compete to start somewhere, but even farther down, like Zach Wilson or these guys, why not go and sign with the Kansas City Chiefs or a team like that and say, hey, you know what? You're going to lose Carson Wentz. I'll come here. I can play. If Patrick Mahomes misses 5 games, I can win 2 of them. And that's all you need out of me. And you just show me what it's like to be a championship team. You show me what it's like to be a real quarterback. I don't know why more quarterbacks don't do that instead of like bouncing around with terrible teams where they're going to be the scapegoat every time, right? It's like, I don't know. What do you like? If you were Mac Jones, what would you try and do this offseason?
I can't even try to get in that. I think
staying with the Jaguars,
I feel
like it's so dumb. But then you're behind Trevor Lawrence, who's the same age as you, pretty much.
I don't know if the Mac Jones there's going to be much of a market there. I think he's going to be viewed as a high end backup. If anything, like, I know the end of the year played pretty well, had some good fantasy numbers, but we've seen what it looks like when Mac Jones is a starter. I don't know which way it's going to go with Mac Jones. You could also say potentially sign with a team that maybe has an older quarterback and sort of make a somewhat lateral move, but somebody who maybe the shelf life is not quite as long. That could end up being a move for a guy like Mac Jones. It's hard for me to get in Mac Jones' head. I'd rather get in a guy like Justin Fields' head. I think I'm more like what I mean, if I'm in tune with that.
Fantasy relevant. Yeah. Well, I just wanted here's what I wanted to do, Theo. I wanted to group every young quarterback that's boring and not interesting, and now we've just talked about them all at once.
Yeah,
and they're done. So
Daniel Jones is interesting though because
Daniel
of
Jones is interesting. I'll give you
the
that.
the Indianapolis rumor out there where uh
Ooh,
Anthony Richardson, we've seen them bench Anthony Richardson before. And I think Daniel Jones would be enough juice behind Richardson and enough that schematically they wouldn't have to change the entire offense.
right.
If Jones came in for Richardson, you could still do a lot of the quarterback runs, a lot of the read option stuff that they've been doing. So I think like Daniel Jones schematically, it's a good fit, and
And
also with
it's a good litmus test too,
yeah.
because you get Daniel Jones in there and you get Anthony Richardson, you got them next to each other, and you say, okay, let's see what this looks like. And if Daniel Jones is outperforming Anthony Richardson every day in practice, now you say, wait a second, we got a
And on the
problem.
flip side, it would be like Anthony Richardson, maybe it's more of a little pressure on him and maybe he rises with the occasion in year 3, been sort of written off. And obviously there's some issues with the completion percentage and but Richardson has had some real moments. I mean, we
Right.
look back that how he played when he came back from being benched to starting again, the Jets game and a few of those other really positive moments. Maybe Richardson sort of runs with it. And then as a team, Indianapolis sort of looks better there. Also, we have to factor in Richardson missed time year 1 with an injury. Sort
Right.
of his playing style opens him up to potential injuries. So I think that the Jones one, if you had to pick a landing spot for Daniel Jones, I think that's a really good one for him and also a really good one for the Indianapolis Colts. So
The good thing,
I've really liked that rumored
the
spot.
good thing about the Jones one too is that he does similar things. Because the problem when you bring in Joe Flacco is that you sit there and practice, and Joe Flacco is always going to throw the ball better than Richardson, and then you're going to sit there and say, but Richardson gives us this other level of athleticism. So you're never going to like really put them in a competition and get any answers out of that. With this, at least you know that Daniel Jones can run not at that level, but run at a high enough level where it's like, okay, well, if this guy's throwing the ball that much better and he still gives us some mobility, then what are we wasting our time with here? Like
Yep.
you need to be able to compare apples to apples. So like comparing Joe Flacco to Anthony Richardson, you learn nothing. You don't learn a damn thing. So I'm with you on that. And then just since we're in here wrapping up the quarterback talk, I mean, like guys like Jameis Winston and Jacoby Brissett, whatever, right? Like they're going to go somewhere and potentially start a couple games while a rookie gets ready. Who cares there? Really, the last two interesting guys are Sam Darnold and Russell Wilson. I mean, there's Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins. I mean, I guess if you go with Aaron Rodgers, it changes everything about who you're targeting, right? Like, because now all of a sudden, guys like Amari Cooper and Amari Cooper and DeAndre Hopkins, these guys are back on the table for you because your quarterback is 100 years old. So it's not like you have to build for later. You're playing to win right this second, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Rodgers one's interesting because of just how random the landing spots are. It seems like Rodgers is sort of open to anything at this point, with a starting pathway to viability. I mean, certainly the best outcome for Rodgers of the rumored teams is probably Minnesota as the bridge quarterback to whenever JJ McCarthy can take over, because we've seen so many quarterbacks have success in that offense. And Aaron Rodgers will be stepping into a situation where he has Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, his former running back in Aaron Jones, and also TJ Hawkinson at tight end. That would be some of the best weapons he's ever had in his entire career as a starting quarterback. So that one would make sense. And then you see the rumors where it's like Rodgers would also be a potential option for the Giants, for the Titans. And then the new one, which makes no sense, is Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback in Seattle after they start getting rid of everybody. And it's like Rodgers is, I guess, does Rodgers have the makeup to be like, if you're Seattle and you're kind of doing a soft rebuild here, do you want Rodgers to be your quarterback? It
No.
just seems sort of like counterintuitive, but I don't know. I think Rodgers will be a starting quarterback next year. I just don't know for who. I think that's really the random one. I actually think other dominoes fall before Rodgers in this period. I think Justin Fields and Darnold, I think those two dominoes will fall early on in the free agent process. And then I think Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers, those guys sort of settle in after the two younger guys.
I've got it all figured out, Theo.
Tell me, because I'm
I've got it.
curious.
Here's what you do. Here's narrative city, bro. You ready for this? There is one landing spot because, like, you go to the Vikings and people just, everyone just wants to see JJ McCarthy, right? there's one landing spot where Aaron Rodgers would not be the most hated quarterback in the room. It's the
Where's that?
Cleveland Browns. It's the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah,
You go to the
I could see
Cleveland
that.
Browns, right? You go to the Cleveland Browns. If you want to, dude, if it's a high risk, it's a high risk, high reward move for Rodgers, but you basically just try and pull the LeBron James. You go to the city of Cleveland that has just been beaten up, and you bring them any level of success, and you'll be a hero. And I'll tell you, they have Deshaun Watson under contract for 2 years. He's not going to play this year, but you cannot even get out from his contract from 2026. So you try Rodgers or maybe Kirk Cousins for 1 year. And if there's nothing left in the tank, then you just let Deshaun Watson play in 2026. And if that stinks, then now hopefully you can move on. And if Rodgers comes in and crushes, then you turn to Deshaun Watson and say, hey, you know what? Maybe like ease up on the no trade clause and we can get you somewhere else, anywhere else, right? And just get yourself out of this. But that's like, that to me is one spot where it's like, okay, and not to mention you have Myles Garrett there who is saying, I'm not going to play unless we're competing now somehow, right? I'm not going to play unless we're playing to win because I want to be a winner. Like, there you go. Say, hey, you know what? We're bringing in a 3-time MVP and we're going to play to win. So then you can at least, get. I mean, Garrett did sign the big extension, so he's going to play now. But
Yeah,
like now you're motivating. You're doing something, like you're giving them the plan. Like, here's the plan. We're going to bring in this guy. He's arguably still the best passer available, right? Is Sam Darnold the better passer? Is Russell Wilson the better passer right now than Aaron Rodgers?
no, I mean, I think that everything you said makes a lot of sense when it comes to Cleveland. But I do think with Cleveland, it's going to be their starting quarterback this year. I actually think that you won't see them bring in a quarterback because I think that they're going in with the plan that they're going to end up drafting one of these two guys, and I think it's going to be Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward as your starting quarterback next year. And you bring up sort of Myles Garrett saying he wants to compete. I think both those guys are a clear upgrade of what they've had, and I think that when it comes down to it, the Garrett contract is not it's not as pressing to get it done this year. And I think at the end of the day, Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders are both more appealing maybe to that franchise than these guys. And I think that the Garrett signing takes Abdul Carter potentially off the table unless they want to go pure bookends. And again, if you're chasing a Super Bowl ring, I mean, Coop's whole projection of having one of these older guys as their quarterback and then maybe have Garrett and Abdul Carter just disruptive, as long as Carter, the foot injury is not necessarily an issue. That would be really scary. But at the end of the day, I think it's rookie quarterback in Cleveland. I think Cleveland's not the team that's going to be connected with one of these free agents. I think that, and if it is one, it's going to be more of like a real bridge.
It would have to be cheap too. They don't have money.
Cheap bridge. I think it's going to be a quarterback being selected at 2 overall, or do they just move up one spot and get the guy they want? But I think they've been connected enough to Sanders and Ward that I think it's going to be 1-2 quarterback, and then I think Carter goes off the board at 3.
Okay, I like it. I mean, yeah, it is kind of like a crazy pipe dream, and then there's no reason for Rodgers to really do that. But I mean, I just feel like if he wants to, like, go for the ultimate legacy move, it would be to bring a little bit of hope to the city of Cleveland just at the end. And you know what? Win a few games. You don't even have to win. If you win 8 or 9 games, then people are like, hey, you know what? Aaron Rodgers was here.
They were ready to name Jameis Winston mayor of Cleveland after the win over Baltimore,
saying,
you know?
Right. Yeah. So, okay, let's wrap running back 2, and then we'll get into wide receivers. So running back, we talked about Najee Harris, where we want him to go. We talked about Nick Chubb. Let's say you were somebody that got a little over your skis a couple years ago when Javonte Williams was the running back, 2 or 3 over on Keep Trade Cut.
Oh man, those
what
are the
if
days.
Those are the days. What if
I flipped him? There was a league where I flipped him for 3 first-round picks, and I remember that one when he hit. Shout out to our boy Dwayne McFarland, who's told everybody he's going to be a top 5 pick in redraft. Then, of course, we saw Melvin Gordon re-sign. During that little 3-week period, I flipped him for 3 first-round picks. Just printing money, Coop, in Dynasty.
Well, let's say you're Dwayne McFarland and you traded 3 first-round picks for Javonte Williams, and of course you're still holding him to this day because you would never turn around and admit that you overpaid. You would never accept the sunk cost fallacy. So you've got Javonte Williams. He's 24, 25 still. Where can he have a potential career resurgence? right? Because we know Sean Payton. The thing about Sean Payton is when you get in the doghouse over there, you can end up buried under the doghouse. Like Greg Dulcich played one game where he got 8 targets, he dropped 3 of them, and then he didn't play for that team again. You know what I mean? So like Javonte Williams could have just gotten his bad side. Where's the spot?
I don't know if there's a spot
And
because
stop protecting your rookies. Stop protecting your
no, I'm not.
prospects.
I'm just saying that the Javonte Williams, if we just look at the profile for Javonte Williams, he's turning 25. Okay. He's turning 25 years old. And
Turning
we saw
25 means he's 24, which as
okay.
far compared to the other free agent running backs is gold.
Well, but when it comes to Javonte, though, like you talked about the role with Joe Lombardi, his role was incredible last year. He was top 5 in running back targets. He caught 50 passes, but the guy is just an inefficient runner these days. And Coop, if he couldn't take over that Denver backfield and grab it by the throat last year with Audric Estime and Jaleel McLaughlin as his main competition, again behind with a mobile quarterback next to him, with a good offensive line in front of him, and with minimal target competition at tight end or wide receiver 2, then I don't think it's going to happen on another team. And when it comes to Javonte, you bring up the youth.
Theo. I don't think you understand how free agency works. It's a clean slate.
Clean slate.
It's just complete. Whatever happened is, that's done. That's gone. You're rejuvenated. You're rebaptized in the waters of Los Angeles, and or Jerry Jones's special stuff in Dallas. I mean, come on, dude. Forget the opportunity. Forget that Joe Lombardi loves forcing passes to the running back. Forget that Jaleel McLaughlin's 180 pounds and Audric Estime is fat. Like, if you forget all that, anything's possible.
Okay, so the spot where you would get the blood boiling for Javonte Williams,
Yeah,
the Kansas City Chiefs.
See?
Yeah. So,
Hey, was that so hard? Was that
Yeah.
so hard? I mean,
No.
Kansas City Chiefs, Isaiah Pacheco. I mean, the thing with Pacheco is that, like, he obviously broke his leg, and then he had a plate put in, and then he hurt his ribs. But Kareem Hunt outplayed him down the stretch.
Yeah.
So, and Kareem Hunt's now a free agent. So,
Yeah.
hey, now you're talking. It's a rival. It's Andy Reid. Was that so
And
bad?
you see it every year where I've said this before, and some people hate when I say this, but do people value guys in division that they've seen twice a year live, maybe a little bit more so than they do than other people? Maybe there's somebody in-house for the Kansas City Chiefs that says, Javonte, we're going to get dirt cheap. We're going to give him Zach Moss money. This is nothing but a dice roll here. But if he stays healthy with his pass catching profile, and we can't really necessarily trust Pacheco. Pacheco, of course, the 7th round pick. We got a lot out of Kareem Hunt. And this is a franchise where when they sign these kind of veterans, usually they get a little something out of them. We saw last year Juju have a couple of really usable weeks.
Juju signed there for $4 million, 1 year, $4 million. Marquise Brown signed there for 1 year, $7 million. This is where guys go to sign cheap deals to play 1 year and hopefully get paid when they're 25, which this time next year, Javonte Williams will be 25. So, I mean, it makes all the sense in the world for him to take the cheapest possible deal and go to the best possible landing spot and then get paid, man. I don't know. That's great, dude. I don't know why I had to pull teeth to get you to say that.
Listen, I because it's not sexy. I like
it was
sexy
there.
landing spot. It was right there. But
what's wrong with that? That's great for Javonte Williams for the Chiefs. I mean, come on, you're not going to get any better. That's it.
Kansas City.
That's great. All right, let's talk some wide
a more logical landing spot. Here, I'll give you one more landing spot with Javonte where you don't necessarily hate it. He signs as a backup to Alvin Kamara and competes down in New Orleans because you have an older back in front of him. Maybe he gets back, sort of levels out, and then when Kamara, moves on, maybe Javonte sees something there. So a couple of spots right
and
there.
And then he's the back for Kellen Moore.
Yeah,
in a couple of years. So that's a dynasty. That's more of a dynasty than a redraft.
But Kansas City would get the blood. Kansas City would get the blood boiling and raise the ADP.
There's all sorts of narratives there. I like that, dude. Let's do more of that. Okay, let's talk wide receivers. So let's talk big boys first before we get into some of those other. Well, actually, no. Let's start with the slot flanker type guys. Right. Chris Godwin, is he back with the Bucks? He wants, what is it, $25 million? They're saying a year.
I think Chris Godwin ultimately will be a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. I think both sides will want it. He's had success with Baker Mayfield. This is a team that he started with. He might as well keep it going. Played at an extremely high level last year. Again, this is an offense that averaged 29 points per game. I think both sides want to get it done, and I think it makes sense for both to get them done. Tampa Bay is a contender as well. This is a team that's made the playoffs every year. Uh, they also promoted from within this year when Liam Cohen moved on. So I think more likely than not, Chris Godwin remains a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. I think if he goes elsewhere, I think New England would love to drop a hammer and pay him a fortune after being boxed out on a lot of other players. That would be the team that I think would be most aggressive with Godwin is New England. And then I think Jacksonville would also potentially be a spot he could land in. And it seems sort of counterintuitive because Kirk and Ingram, they move on from. But again, this is Liam Cohen's guy. And if you think of a wide receiver that could coexist well with Brian Thomas, Godwin and him, that would be really, really good.
Then it moves Godwin, then it moves BTJ out of that slot flanker role. And I guess then he's in just Puka Nacua. Then he's Mike Evans, but
and Godwin's a guy that played 55% in the slot, 60% in the slot. Does he be a 50% guy and then you just work Brian Thomas in a little more often into the slot? Like, I think the creative play callers can find a way to get Brian Thomas 30% slot usage, even in a Chris Godwin offense.
Right.
And Godwin's versatile too. Like, I know that's not the ideal fantasy outcome, but in terms of real NFL, putting pressure on defenses, moving guys around, Godwin 50% slot. You could sacrifice 15% of those slot snaps to our guy BTJ Coop. You could do it as an OC. I'm sure
I can't spare a single one.
I know. You can not a single one. Godwin would be a 95% slot guy for
I can't spare one. That's what you want. The ideal wide receiver. I mean, the number one all-time fantasy football season, CeeDee Lamb ran the fourth most routes. Sorry, the number one all-time fantasy football season was Cooper Kupp, and he ran the fourth most routes from the slot of any player. Number 2 is Jerry Rice, so not even worth talking about. Number 3, CeeDee Lamb also ran the fourth most routes from the slot. That's the thing. You play slot in 3 wide receiver sets. When they go to 2 wide receiver sets, you move out wide. That's Godwin. That's what we want. That's what we want Brian Thomas Jr. doing in that Godwin role. We want Godwin doing that somewhere else.
I think
in New England.
The one other team that sort of makes sense, just in terms of a salary cap and need, but would be like kind of the not necessarily a great fantasy landing spot. I think that the Chargers and the Tennessee Titans both have the cap space to get a Godwin deal done.
Don't do that. Stop putting him in places that have
we want Ladd McConkey to go and be the wide receiver one this
year. And if they have 2 slot receivers, that ruins the tight end landing spot for me too.
Coop, it's a hard world out there, dude. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be Tampa Bay. I think this one's kind of moot. It's fun to talk about, but it makes too much sense. And when we talk about Tampa Bay, a healthy Mike Evans, healthy Chris Godwin with an emerging Jalen McMillan, we start getting a little bit excited about that. Not to mention Bucky Irving is like that, and he's at the running back spot. So Tampa Bay would be really, really a fun one if he just re-signs there. And Baker Mayfield, back-to-back years as a QB1. This year had his best season as a pro. Let's do it. If you're Tampa Bay, just add these guys for Baker, see what happens, and keep pushing. Because that division, Tampa Bay, if Chris Godwin re-signs there, they're still in the driver's seat to keep winning that division, keep making the playoffs. If you keep getting a ticket, you have a chance to win the raffle. So Tampa Bay's be right there.
Exactly. I think that's the way to go. With Stephon Diggs, does the Christian Kirk move prohibit Stephon Diggs from staying? I mean, I know that Nick Caley, he's going to bring in that Rams offense that they want to do 3 wide receivers and 1 tight end. So they obviously still need 3 wide receivers. Tank Dell probably not going to play. I mean, do you think Stephon Diggs is back? He said he wanted to be back.
I don't know. I mean, apparently the Christian Kirk one doesn't preclude them, but doesn't it feel like this is sort of a Diggs replacement type move?
Right. Yes.
I mean, the low ADOT, especially with the role, like maybe if this was Stephon Diggs 4 years ago, but what did they do with Diggs last year? They used him in that really low ADOT role, and he averaged 15 points per game for fantasy, but his ADOT was the lowest we've seen it, I think, in his entire career. That seems like Christian Kirk steps right into that one. I think they got great value out of the Kirk deal. Like we saw it last year where they got Joe Mixon for a 7th-round pick. He ended up playing great, ended up giving them big-time fantasy production and big-time on-the-field production as well. With Kirk, I don't know if Kirk's going to give you 15 points per game, but can Kirk give you 13 points per game next year and be a viable secondary target? And maybe Houston just drafts somebody with speed or size, a Jaden Higgins, a Matthew Golden, instead of going with re-signing Diggs. Plus, Diggs coming off of an injury. When's he going to be available next year? Are you going to have to wait half the year for Diggs?
Yeah, it's ACL, so it's not as bad. Like it's not as bad as like Ayuk, where it's ACL and MCL, 2 surgeries, 11 months. But he might not be back. The thing is, there's not really a lot of like teams that just have one big split end, and they could use a slot guy, right? There's not like, I guess, the Broncos, but again, yeah, I'm doing it. Now I'm being too protective of the tight ends, just like you were with the running back prospects. I'm like, well, he can't go to the Broncos because then that's, we don't want that. We want Evan Ingram or Tyler Warren or Colson Loveland there. So, but I mean, at the end of the day, the answer for every one of these teams, you can just always say the Patriots.
Well, the answer I think with Diggs is I think signs with the Dallas Cowboys, plays with his brother. Diggs has already gotten paid in a bunch of teams.
True.
Plus, he would be able to step right into that, like when healthy, would step into the clear wide receiver 2 role. We saw what with Jalen Tolbert, with Brandon Cooks. Like I think a healthy Diggs is a level above where those guys are at in their career. So I think Diggs with Dallas makes sense for him. It'd be very cool to see him play with his brother, and it would be the chance to play opposite CeeDee Lamb. He'd get advantageous coverages. This is still a team that is probably a playoff team next year if they can address some issues on the offensive line. So for me, I think Diggs. Oh, there you go, New England. You want Diggs on New England? I don't know. I think New England's. And I saw somebody in the chat say this. Like, does New England take? So I'll ask you this. I think like Ted McMillan at 4, Travis Hunter at 4 are the 2 names sort of being mentioned a lot. It's like best player available with Hunter. McMillan would obviously be the 140 target, maybe 160 target guy in year 2. Like from a fantasy perspective, Tet at 4 would be incredible. But I think there's all a chance that New England takes a not what we want to see in fantasy, but probably what they end up doing is I think they end up taking a guy like Armand Membu, the big tackle from Missouri, at 4 overall, ahead of some of these guys that maybe the fantasy community wants them for. And certainly me and you want them to get. But I think they need to get that offensive line in order to protect Drake May. And then I think they go from 38 into the back end of the first round, and they trade up to get one of these first round wide receivers, because it's a like a cascade effect here. DK probably prevents Pittsburgh from taking a wide receiver in the first round. Devontae Adams probably boxes LA out of taking a wide receiver in the first round. So it's going to create trade up spots where I think New England could trade up, get themselves a Golden, a Burden, an Aya Manor, maybe a Jalen Knoll if they value him at that level, and build with a youthful wide receiver. So I think offensive line is very important for New England this year. It sucks for us because we're talking about skill position players, but they've got to address that O-line, or Drake May might get killed next year.
Yeah, I got a lot of different hats I wear here. When I wear my fantasy alarm hat, I want them to take Ted McMillan, right?
Yeah.
When I wear my Boston hat, I want them to take an offensive lineman.
Yeah.
And I'm always wearing my tight end whisperer hat, just trying to whisper these guys to the right landing spots.
Hey, Tyler Warren in New England, you could trade down, and maybe your number one target is just Tyler Warren. Trade down to 9 or something and take Tyler Warren. I would think that would be incredible.
Just wildcat quarterback Tyler Warren. He's unbelievable, bro.
He's awesome.
I just love just watching his film. It's so hard not to rank him 1. But again, I think the draft is going to potentially. It's one of those things where it's like him and Loveland. They're both awesome, but like Tyler Warren is just like
but I think the real argument is, if you want to get like Galaxy Brain with this, Tyler Warren is 2.5 years older. Loveland's like 20. Is there a little more room to run in the profile for Loveland? But again, it's you can like both. This isn't one of these. I hate when we get to this time of year where it's like a huge fight in the community, which one's better. They're both tight end ones as soon as they get drafted. But I'll give you a scenario. I
look at it kind of like Hawkinson versus Fant, which isn't fair because we know the outcome now. But like at the time, it was like, okay, Hawkinson is an NFL tight end for sure. but Noah Fant could be like this freak athlete that's younger and he could do anything. You know what I mean? It's like looking back, everyone, when you use that comparison, looking back, it's like, oh yeah, obviously you want this guy. But it is kind of like that where it's like Warren feels like he can't miss, but you're right. There's more upside with a younger guy that's declaring earlier and coming out earlier and did everything at a younger age.
So I had an interesting one, just one non-free agent question for you. I just did an NFL mock draft earlier this morning with Brett Whitefield over at Fantasy Points, and we had trades in this one. So we had Tyler Warren going off the board at 9 overall to the New Orleans Saints, which I think is a logical landing spot and need. Then we had a trade up where Denver trades up from 20 to 13 and selects Loveland. So you'd have Colston Loveland at 13 with Denver, or you'd have New Orleans with Tyler Warren at 9. How would you rank the two of them then, Coop? Would that flip flop your ranking of the two from a fantasy and from a dynasty perspective for one to get to a quote unquote better situation despite having a slightly lower draft capital?
Knowing the two schemes, I think you would have to go with Loveland just
There
because
you
we
go.
know, right? We know what they've said. They straight up have said, right? The GM Pat came out and he was like, "Look, we need help over the middle. We need to improve the tight end position." And then you've got Lombardi and Sean Payton loving to use those guys at wide receiver, right? It's like even Gerald Everett basically played big slot. It's just a better landing spot. Whereas like Kellen Moore, he does run a high tempo offense, but it's going to have at least two high end wide receivers. I think, you know what I mean? So I think both players still good, but I think in that situation, well now what if the thing is, and now what if you put Tyler Warren on the Chargers and they don't add a wide receiver and it's Tyler Warren versus Colston Loveland? Then you have to make that pick. That's going to be very, very difficult. I think
I
that's what the draft. Stop trying to turn this into a draft show. Let's go. We got 5 minutes left. Let me throw some names out. Okay. And let me, we'll talk about where we want them to end up.
Coop, I'll go longer if you want. I'm ready
I
to.
will too.
I drink a huge cold brew here.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
ready to cover the whole free agent markets. I already co-opted with a lot of NFL draft talk. Big apologies to everybody. Don't want to hear
No,
NFL
we
draft talk.
want it. That's why we brought you on because it's perfect. Because that's the best part of free agency as a fantasy football player. It's to say, right? It's to say, okay, we want the high end players going to the good spots, or we want nobody going there. The last thing we want, okay? The last thing we want is to take one of these really good landing spots for a tight end and put Tyler Conklin there on a big contract because he's good enough, right? He's good enough to be the starter and be the inline tight end. They're not just going to make him a blocking tight end. It just ruins it. So like that's where we're at today. It's like if the Broncos don't sign Evan Ingram, I want them to sign another blocking tight end. I want them to sign like Mo Alley Cox, and just have and leave that open. Because so it is good to have that perspective on here of like, oh, wait a second, like we don't like you mentioned with the when I asked who should go to the Broncos, right? You didn't say Kenneth Gainwell to catch a bunch of passes. You said right, which I mean, like as in terms of pass catching running backs available, I mean, he's certainly not the worst, but it's like you're right. We don't want them to sign anyone into that role.
No.
We want them to draft Travion Henderson into that role. So I'm fully with you. There are a few. So one interesting thing is guys like DeAndre Hopkins and Amari Cooper, at least last year, but for Hopkins, the last couple of years have been kind of part-time players. So I'm wondering, like, what's a spot that where those guys could land, that where they could be fantasy relevant. I mean, there's a real life spot that I think in real life this team would probably be one of the better spots for them. Would be like a team like the Lions, where they don't need to be full time players. It's just you should have better Tim Patrick now, right? Where it's like he comes in, plays on the outside for 3 wide receiver sets, but comes off the field for the 2 wide receiver sets in favor of Amon-Ra St. Brown and James Williams. I think in real life that would be good, but it'd be bad for fantasy, right?
I mean, I think that would be bad for fantasy. I keep going back to the landing spot that I think a veteran wide receiver will land up in, Dallas Cowboys, and we saw
Yes.
the nostalgia signing last year with Zeke Elliott. It's not quite as nostalgic, but Amari Cooper did have a great deal of success there. Maybe ends his career as a Dallas Cowboy and signs there. But with Cooper, he couldn't even stay on the field with the Bills last year. So it was like the snap share wasn't there for Amari Cooper. And it's so weird because we saw such success the year before with especially the Flacco games in Cleveland, where Cooper was just on fire to end the season. Did Cooper lose a step, this much of a step? Maybe. Sometimes when these older players fall off, you've talked about this before with me, Coop, they don't just like slowly fall off. They usually just fall off of a cliff.
Face plant, bro.
But is it quite there, or is it just, was he a really bad fit with Buffalo? Dallas is sort of the free square. I like your Lions idea. Lions could use another wide receiver there. Again, that's not a great fantasy one, but it does help them more as a team. I think that there's a few others that kind of like, are the Commanders just going to have an old guy wide receiver room next year and they might as well just go. Yeah, it's like an old guy, putting a team together on like Madden or something, and it's like Debo and McLaurin, and then Amari Cooper in the wide receiver 3 role takes over the Diami Brown role. So yeah, I mean, obviously there's a bunch of landing spots, but does Cooper have juice left? We know Coop has the juice. But does Cooper have the juice?
Yeah. Well, I will say this. If I'm Amari Cooper's agent, I'm bringing with me a briefcase full of x-rays that show an injured wrist, because that's what they told us, right? They told us that Amari...
That's the flex you want. Look at how bad my guy's wrist was.
Look how bad it was, but it's fixed. The briefcase has 2 different sets of x-rays. One run with the injury, and then the other one with the fixed wrist. You got
a weight loss ad, like a weight loss ad.
Exactly, like before and after. It's like, we're back. Yeah. You know what I mean? That's what you're doing because it's like, I feel like that was what wide receivers were doing last year. Tyreek Hill, oh, my wrist. Xavier Legette, ouch, drops that pass against the Eagles, goes on Amon-Ra St. Brown's podcast, and he's like, well, I don't want to make excuses, and I just didn't catch it, but my wrist is completely broken. It's like, okay, that's an excuse. So, but that's what you're betting on. You're betting on this guy not being okay. I mean, we saw in the Super Bowl, DeAndre Hopkins can still make contested catches. So can Keenan Allen, can still box out too. But I mean, like, have you seen pictures of Keenan Allen's shoulder? It's legitimate.
It's mangled. It's mangled.
Disgusting, dude. It's like a unicorn horn, dude. But like these guys, I think if you find the right spot for them, and I do like what Dynasty Coach A, our guy John, said. I mean, like, that's a team that has a slot flanker. So Ladd McConkey, I think, can play slot for 3 wide, goes out wide for 2 wide receiver sets. Opposite him, though, they could use a big boy. They could use a big body that can tether his foot to the line and play split end. That's guys like Amari Cooper. That's guys like DeAndre Hopkins. A name that I'm intrigued by for real life, I mean, maybe more real life than fantasy, and I know probably get made fun of, but I think Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is a very valuable NFL player.
He fills a role, and he's obviously a very good red zone target and a touchdown scorer. I mean, people love to like brush it aside because he was sort of like a meme last year. But yeah, I mean, he also has relative youth, Coop, where sometimes we see these. It's funny because you're going to end up seeing guys like Diami Brown, Westbrook-Ikhine, and Darius Slayton all get contracts, and people are going to be like, why are they paying these guys? The relative youth makes a difference when compared to like a guy like Amari Cooper,
All these guys, I mean, like, even if you go through the list of big guys that can play split end, big, like, so we're talking big bodies, like, and when I say split end, for folks that aren't really familiar, you've got the tight end, the inline guy. Split end, you have to have 7 guys on the line every play. So it is a different role to put your foot on the line. You can't go in motion. You don't have that extra inch there, right? There's a reason that Rondell Moore is a part-time player. He only plays slot. There's a reason that Wan'Dale Robinson only plays slot. It's because he's outside the top 200 backs in back-to-back years in run block. And he's just not big enough to play that role. There's only a handful of guys that can play that role. And as you mentioned, all of them are 29 years or older. So Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams already signed, but he's older. Demarcus Robinson is 30. Justin Watson is 30. Noah Brown's 29. Tim Patrick has to be 30, right? Like, is there any big wide receiver that's at least like 6'1" or 6'2", 200 plus pounds besides Nick Westbrook-Ikhine that isn't 29 years old? I don't think there is. I truly can't even think of a single one. How old's Olamide Zacchaeus? Like, I mean, just like, who's out there, dude? Who's out there that can do it? And there's a lot of teams that could use this player, because there's a lot of teams that have a guy like CeeDee Lamb where they don't want him out wide. They want him in the slot. But to put a guy in the slot, you have to have somebody that can play split end, or you have to go with 2 tight end sets and tether 2 tight ends or tether a big slot to do that, dude. So I think this guy gets paid a bunch of money, that's why. And maybe don't necessarily chase him in fantasy depending on landing spot, but that's why.
So Westbrook Akine, I think Tennessee will end up bringing him back for all the reasons.
That's boring.
The team that's been linked to him that sort of like is not the worst case scenario schematically, Atlanta Falcons, because they could use a guy in the red zone like Westbrook Akine, and also it wouldn't do anything to Drake London, but it actually helps Michael Penix. So schematically,
it helps Mooney because now
now
because you do that. Like, so think about all the creative things that teams do. Think about how often Puka Nacua goes in motion. Like, they would send Puka Nacua across the field and then Cooper Kupp before the snap, multiple guys to see if the defense is in man-to-man. Why could the Rams do that? Because Demarcus Robinson played sacrificial X and was getting punched in the face every single play by playing that split end role. If you have Ladd McConkey on your fantasy team, you want Nick Westbrook-Akine getting signed to your team because he's not going to soak up targets, but he is going to soak up snaps. That's the best possible. The more guys on the field that don't get the football, the better it is for your players. I want the field to be full of Kyle Juszczyks and Durham Smythes and Charlie Warners and Alec Ingolds so that my guys are the only guys getting the ball. And Nick Westbrook-Akine, I mean, some people like him. I mean, Ian, I can never tell with Ian at fantasy. I can never tell if he's joking or not.
I think a lot of it's joking.
I can never tell, dude, because I'm like, does he really like this guy or not? Because he likes these guys. Ian, he likes Nick Westbrook-Akine, he likes Demarcus Robinson, and I kind of like him too. But like, whenever I see those tweets, I don't know if I'm supposed to retweet it, if I'm like out on the joke on that. I'll check. But I like the guy.
We need clarification.
Yeah. Now, of this group of guys, just to wrap up this particular player type, which one would be most interesting if you were a team like the Chargers? And again, Mike Williams probably not going back to the Chargers, but Nick Westbrook-Akine, Mike Williams, Demarcus Robinson, Justin Watson, Tim Patrick, Noah Brown. If you had to pick one.
God, it's disgusting.
I know.
Disgusting. I know. Westbrook-Akine.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, Westbrook-Akine, especially with what they want to do in terms of run, in terms of play action, having a guy who's a threat, especially with the red zone schemes, and also his skill set fits in well with what they can do with Ladd. So, yeah, I'll say Westbrook-Akine would be an upgrade over some of the other guys they were playing last year at wide receiver. So Westbrook-Akine, I think that would be the spot, the player that I would select. Demarcus Robinson would also not be bad. Comes across town. We know that he's a guy who can make big plays downfield. And again, skill set doesn't overlap with the show. We want Ladd McConkey to get 170 targets next year. That's what we want in fantasy.
Yeah, Laura, let's end this wide receiver segment quick here with one quick game. I'll call this game yes or no.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you. I'm going to give you a name, and you tell me if there's a possibility they land somewhere that creates fantasy relevance for them, or if they're just done. Brandon Cooks.
Done.
Deontay Johnson.
Done.
Ooh, Elijah Moore.
Probably done.
Probably. He was so inefficient.
And also you need to commit to scheming him the ball and manufacturing looks for him. Like, is a team going to do that for Elijah Moore? I'm not sure. We had multiple times where we thought it was going to happen. No.
Last 2 years in a row, he was easily the least efficient guy to get 100 plus targets. Yards per route run, outside the top 150 million. Josh Palmer?
No.
Right. He's given me the Marquez Valdez-Scantling feelings where it's like, you're not going to be good.
You had it, Coop. You had the year with we don't know, right. Life. This is life. We had Palmer's best year. It was 2 years ago.
If the best landing spot is the team that you're leaving, then
no,
it's not good. Okay.
Chris Godwin back to the Bucks, 3-year, $66 million deal.
Good.
Per Ian Rappaport.
Good. That's good. I like that. Yeah. Does Theo think Deontay Johnson's washed? Deontay Johnson is a head case. I think all these guys are. Like, Devontae Adams complained about not getting targets after a win. The one spot I would say that Deontay Johnson, there's some hope for him. And again, this is not a homer take. I'm saying that this guy is a head case. He needs 100. He needs to get the ball every play. If the Patriots were to sign him, you would have Vrabel and McDaniels who could possibly deal with egos, right? Like I wouldn't want Gerard Mayo having to deal with an ego like this, but Vrabel and him, and it is a spot where you can say, okay, this is our best guy by far. We'll give him 120 targets. I think that in that spot you could corral the craziness to some degree. You could appease it, right? Like they say not to appease tyrants, but you could appease this guy by giving him 7 targets a game.
Think about the teams he came and left with in a quick period of time. Baltimore certainly knows what they're doing, and Houston's been a team that's been making good personnel decisions for 2 years in a row ever since DeMeco Ryans showed up in town. So for me, it's like Deontay Johnson, they're not even like both those teams. And then Carolina had him, and he's producing, and they had nothing really in the wide receiver room. They moved on from him after a few months. So for me, Deontay Johnson just seems like a guy who might fizzle out of the league. Yeah. I'll bring up there's a few teams that sort of stand out for me. Like Tennessee has all this cap space. Maybe Tennessee adds Deontay. We saw them like when they had last year with Ridley, certainly Westbrook-Akine on the market. There's pathway to like targets there. Jacksonville has now this cap space. Maybe he signs a prove it deal and finds a way on the field as a Christian Kirk replacement. There's scenarios, but I don't think NFL teams will say, I'd rather have Darius Slayton than Deontay Johnson.
Well, with the Baltimore and the Texans thing, it was that he showed up and he thought he was just going to play every play and get the ball every time. And then when that didn't happen, he cried. Yeah. And, so it's like, I don't know. I'm willing to say like, okay, clean slate.
But he still showed up and cried on teams trying to win a Super Bowl.
Right. But he doesn't want to win a Super Bowl. He doesn't want to win a Super Bowl. He wants the ball. Devontae Adams said the same thing. Devontae Adams said the same thing. He says, if the football doesn't look right, then I don't care if we're winning. He goes, I hold myself to a higher standard. I mean, Deontay Johnson, he's crazy.
It's an absolute bar, what Devontae Adams said, by the way.
Right. He's like, I hold myself to a higher standard. I'm like,
it's ridiculously hard. I love it.
I'm like, dude, that's the most selfish diva thing I've ever seen. Put in the classiest way. Like he took the sentiment of it is completely wrong, though. The sentiment of it goes against everything that we're told from the moment you put your first helmet on. From the moment I was playing flag football, I was told that you play for the name on the front of the jersey, not the back. And that he essentially said, I play for the name on the back of the jersey. But he said it in the most boss way possible that everyone was like, yeah, that rocks. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's just, dude, when you're that good, when you're great, he's just like, I'm just too great. I'm a god. So like, I don't care if the Raiders win. Like that's awesome, dude. Okay, let's get you out of here because I gotta do some stuff too. Let's do just real quick run through the tight ends.
Sure.
I split them up into two-way tight ends, blocking tight ends, and pass catching tight ends because there's a number of tight ends that don't catch passes, right? So we don't need to talk about Durham Smythe. No. If you need a blocking tight end, they're available. Oh my goodness. Mo Alley Cox, Harrison Bryant, Pharaoh Brown, Ross Dwelly, Johnny Munt, John Bates, Durham Smythe, Chris Manners, Michael Pruitt, Ian Thomas, Hunter Long, Nick Fournette, Jack Stoll. I mean, like they're just all over the ground. Pure pass catching tight ends are guys that you don't want inline blocking. It's a mistake. So the two-way tight ends that can actually block and run routes, there are very few of them. Tyler Conklin, Austin Hooper, Hayden Hurst, any interest?
Tyler Conklin, because we saw it for 2 years in a row where he was like at the Mendoza line, and then Aaron Rodgers showed up, and the usage was more sporadic. But I think Tyler Conklin has the ability to be a guy at least we're considering on the waiver wire next year. If he lands in a situation where there's a pathway to targets at the tight end position, he can catch the ball at a consistent level. He's a capped ceiling guy, but not one that's like a complete fantasy zero. Conklin would be my bet. Last year we had a situation where Hayden Hurst could have taken off and run, and I get that there was some injuries and all that, but again, Hayden Hurst, I think that was last year. Yeah. This year, it's Tyler Conklin. Conklin's the one that we'll keep an eye on in the market.
If you
Seattle Seahawks.
I was just gonna say, if they cut Noah Fant and sign him, that offense uses a fullback. So now, because of the fullback snaps, it takes the wide receiver 3 out of the game. and you basically just have 2 wide receivers and a tight end. And right
Yep.
now, their wide receivers are what? Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is a god, and he's gonna get a ton of targets, is great. And then
And
what? Jake
and
Bobo,
yeah, and it's someone who you're going to draft.
someone you're gonna draft.
The Seattle's wide receiver 2 is not on the team. If they
Right.
and 18 overall could be a wide receiver pick for them. Like I think that their wide receiver 2 is not on the roster right now.
In fantasy football, though, the best ways to create leverage are betting on or against rookies, right? It's like you bet on the rookie and he hits, like Malik Neighbors, you got a lot of value, but you can also bet that the rookie face plants. And then who picks up the slack? Like N'Keal Harry, I mean, nobody predicted him to be a complete zero. What if the Seahawks draft a complete zero? Then where does the ball go? Right? Those are some of the bets you have to make. It's much more fun for the rookie to hit and things to be great, but you have to keep in mind, like, what happens, right? Like, what happens if Jalen Polk has what do you have, like 87 yards on the season? It's like, where does the ball go? And
Yeah.
so, and then last few guys, so the pure pass catching guys, these guys are more interesting. You got converted wide receivers, things like that. So Evan Engram, very enticing.
Might as well take
He's
him off the list. He's the answer for everything,
he's
Coop.
the answer for everything.
Yeah.
Okay, well, okay, so he's the number one. But what about like, so? And again, we want this landing spot for somebody a little better. But Juwan Johnson did play with Sean Payton.
Yeah.
That spot is available. He's a converted wide receiver. I think he is a guy that if he were to land in that spot and they were to just stick with Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin and Cortland Sutton for some reason, now it's like, okay, now we have to think about it. Now we have to consider it in best ball.
Yeah, I mean, Juwan Johnson also has had a high touchdown catch season in his career where he had like 7, 8 touchdown catches. He's the converted wide receiver originally in his career, and he's got the relative youth, Coop. He's not like some washed up guy who's 31 years old.
Right.
I believe Juwan Johnson's like 27. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't know, but
Yeah, Juwan
that sounds
Johnson,
great.
I right about in that wheelhouse. So Juwan Johnson for me is actually an interesting one. I had him. I did like a tight end or a free agent rankings article, Player Profiler, a couple weeks back, which is not even worth reading right now because a lot of the guys re-signed already. But I think that when you talk about Juwan Johnson, the Broncos landing spot's interesting. Indianapolis would be interesting. Again, we bring up Seattle. Could they view him as an upgrade? There's a multiple teams here where he'd be a really interesting landing spot guy. And I'll say the team that has a ton of cap space, you mentioned Hayden Hurst, maybe the Chargers just signed Juwan Johnson instead of having instead of worrying about drafting a tight end, because Harbaugh just wants to draft defensive linemen this year after going with an offensive lineman in the first round last year.
Yeah, 100%. He said he's a trench guy. So I
Yeah.
mean, I want those landing spots for the rookies, but again, that at least would be better than somebody like Austin Hooper, where it's just
Yeah.
like now he's just going to fill a role. I mean, like, and again, if you're rooting for the wide receivers, you want your team to sign Austin Hooper. You want them
Yeah.
to sign Harrison Bryant because you don't want the targets being taken up. All right, let's wrap this show up here with another round of done or fun with tight ends. Mike Gesicki is back with the Bengals. Zach Ertz is back with Washington. Gerald Everett.
I probably done because I don't see a whole lot of landing spots for him. But if there's an injury and he ends up getting the opportunity to play tight end, he's a guy you can consider because he can catch the ball.
So now there's not much left after that. Lucas Kroll. Oh, he signed a reserves future contract. All right,
Yeah.
Stone Smart.
I can't say done when I'm on a pod with you.
That was the test.
No, I would never do you like that, Coop. Never,
All
ever.
right.
Never, ever.
Fun. That's what it is.
Fun.
I mean,
Yeah, Stone Smart is fun.
converted quarterback to wide receiver. We'll see what happens there. We pretty much hit it all, man. I got to
Yeah.
jump in and do the free agent tracker. It looks like Twitter is still down. Probably the worst possible time ever.
The disrespect to the fantasy community from the engineers at X is unbelievable. I can't
think
believe it.
They just didn't know. That's the thing, is that the old Twitter, they would have known that there's a surge today of people re-downloading the app just to see if their favorite team is going to pick somebody up.
Well,
So.
we gave you the Chris Godwin signing. We also saw that Jalen Moore
Warren.
is signed. Jalen Moore signing with the Kansas City Chiefs, so they get a new offensive tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs. That's a huge move for them. Chris Godwin, a huge domino already fell. So Coop and I, we broke it.
We
We're
got
standing on business today.
Jalen Warren, second round tender.
Yeah,
so
we're
he'll
all
be
over
back.
it. We're all over it.
Yeah. Evan Brown back to the Cardinals.
Jonathan Allen, the recently cut commander, is in Minnesota. Evan Ingram is in Denver. No signing yet, but we could see that. Yeah. So like we're on top. We're on point right now. We're even talking about non-fantasy relevant guys. So come on.
So we're doing our best, dude. We're in here. So all right, Theo, tell everybody what you got going on, where they can find you, all the good stuff, brother.
Yeah, so you guys know all my work at Player Profiler. Still dropping pods galore. Just did one with Dave Kluge and Alex Slosky. Very recent Dynasty rookie mock draft. Highly recommend that. Doing a bunch of podcasts with Fantasy Points. Just did an NFL draft over there with Brett Whitefield. So highly recommend subscribing to both those channels on YouTube and in the podcast form. And then all of my articles can be found at Player Profiler and at Fantasy Points. I have my updated redraft top 50 dropping soon at Fantasy Points. Ooh. The top 25 was spicy. People liked it. Expanded it to top 50. I'm still shuffling around. And spoiler alert, Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be ranked a lot higher than some people might be comfortable with.
Yeah, dude, Brian Thomas Jr. See, that's the landing spot for Nick Westbrook-Ikine. You throw him,
love it,
sacrificial X, right? And he's just bad Mike Evans. So Brian Thomas Jr. gets all the targets. Trey Bone.
Love
it. All right, buddy. Wait, everyone,
Thanks.
Follow him on there. For me, I'm at Coupe Fiasco on Twitter, and I'm going to have a free agent tracker running over at Fantasy Alarm. What I'm going to do is any major deals I'll include in there, just the information. If it's a fantasy relevant player, I'm going to do a little paragraph, tell you what it means for fantasy. That way it's like you can get all the information there, but the stuff that we care about most is going to get a little more emphasis because why? I'm running it. And that's what I care about. So we'll definitely mention if a punter gets signed, but there will be a full write-up when Nick Westbrook-Ikine gets signed. All right. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Theo, thank you for coming on. We'll be back this Wednesday. Howard's coming back. We're doing more shows. We're back up and running. We're doing we'll kind of recap everything that happened here. The following Wednesday, we're getting back